Take out your phone. Look at the date on the lock screen. You accept that 4-digit number without question. You treat it as a physical law of the universe. If the screen says it is the 21st century, then it is. But the calendar is not a clock, it is a ledger. And like any ledger, it can be cooked. Cartographers have a trick they use to protect their work. They invent fake streets or non-existent towns and hide them inside their maps. They call them paper towns. If another company steals the map, the fake town proves the theft. It is an artificial geography designed to protect an asset. Time operates the exact same way. We are told the Roman Empire fell, followed by 1,000 years of darkness, followed by a sudden miraculous renaissance. We treat those 1,000 years as a genuine span of human survival. But if you strip away the romantic narrative of knights and plagues and look strictly at the mathematical sequencing of events, the architecture of a paper town emerges. The Middle Ages did not happen. Nearly 1,000 years of human history were synthetically generated. They were copy-pasted into the timeline to create an artificial buffer zone. They didn't just rewrite the past, they stretched it. You don't need to dig through classified archives to see the seam in the edit. You just have to look at how statistics work. Human history is chaotic. Dynasties collapse, kings die of disease, civil wars drag on unpredictably. It is mathematically impossible for two distinct empires, separated by a millennium, to share the exact same sequence of durations. Yet if you track the reign lengths of the ancient Roman emperors, how many years each man ruled, exactly when the successions occurred, exactly how long the interregnums lasted, and place them next to the Holy Roman Empire 1,000 years later, the sequence is identical. The peaks and valleys of the timeline mirror each other perfectly. An ancient emperor rules for 22 years. His medieval counterpart rules for 22 years. A 3-year ancient civil war matches a 3-year medieval succession crisis. This isn't a historical rhyme, it is a duplication of data. The ledger was cooked. Someone took a block of history, altered the names, shifted the geography slightly, and pasted it back into the registry, shoving everything before it hundreds of years deeper into the past. I know exactly what your mind is doing right now. It is a necessary defense mechanism. You are trying to find the flaw. You are telling yourself that written history might be flawed, but the physical science is absolute. You are thinking about carbon dating. You are thinking about tree rings and isotopes. You are telling yourself that we can test the dirt, and the dirt will tell us what year it is. That is the most elegant part of the trap. Carbon-14 decays at a constant rate. That is a physical fact. But the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere fluctuates wildly over time. If you run a piece of wood through a mass spectrometer, the machine does not spit out a year, it spits out a ratio of isotopes. To translate that ratio into a calendar date, you have to anchor it to a calibration curve. You have to build a ruler. To build that ruler, scientists took objects of a known historical age, tested their carbon levels, and used those baselines to calibrate the machines. Where did the baseline objects come from? They came from the exact medieval documents, the exact royal tombs, and the exact religious relics managed by the institutions that wrote the timeline in the first place. The physical science is anchored to the forged paperwork. The calibration curve is a closed loop. If the historical documents are padded, the carbon dating simply authenticates the padding. The machine is not proving the year. The machine is just agreeing with the Vatican's filing system. We have absolutely no physical proof of what year it actually is. The ground cannot tell us. The instruments are compromised. If the Earth has been tampered with, you cannot use the Earth to find your bearings. You have to look at something they couldn't reach. You have to look at the sky. Eclipses are not history. They are mechanics.
Planetary bodies move along fixed, predictable trajectories. Because we understand the math of orbital mechanics, we can run the software backward. We can rewind the sky to see exactly where the moon and the stars were on any given night thousands of years ago. Ancient historians, men who supposedly lived centuries before Christ, wrote down highly specific astronomical observations. They recorded triads of eclipses. They documented exactly where certain planets sat in the zodiac during specific wars. When you plug those exact alignments into an astronomical retro calculator, the sky refuses to corroborate the paperwork. The software looks at the ancient Greek records of the Peloponnesian War, where a specific sequence of solar and lunar eclipses is described, and it runs the math. The alignment did not happen in the 5th century BC. It is a physical impossibility. The software finds that exact planetary configuration only once, in the 11th century. The celestial clockwork points to a timeline that has been radically compressed, pushing the ancient world hundreds of years closer to our own present. But if you slide antiquity forward, you create a massive, glaring problem. What do you do with the 1,000 years of history you just displaced? How do you explain the massive temporal gap sitting between the fall of the old world and the beginning of the modern one? You call it the Dark Ages. Let's stop looking at the math for a second and look at the physical absurdity of the world around us. We are taught that humanity built massive, intricate classical architecture in Rome and Greece, temples with flawless acoustics, aqueducts spanning miles, concrete domes that have survived earthquakes. Then, supposedly, the empire fell, and for 1,000 years humans lived in mud huts. They forgot how to make concrete, they forgot geometry, they forgot how to build a road. Then suddenly the Renaissance happens, the rebirth. Men in tights miraculously remember how to construct perfectly proportioned star forts and vaulted cathedrals out of megalithic stone. Look at a Gothic cathedral. Look at the sheer, overwhelming tonnage of the masonry. You were to believe that a society of plague-ridden serfs operating without power tools, using wooden scaffolding and horse-drawn carts, designed and executed structures that modern engineering firms would struggle to replicate today. Humanity did not suffer a 1,000-year global amnesia. The Dark Ages are not a historical period. They are an empty temporal quarantine zone, an artificial buffer injected into the calendar to separate the surviving population from the builders of the old world. The people of the Renaissance didn't rediscover classical architecture. They inherited it right after the previous owners were removed. They didn't lose the technique. They just hadn't existed yet. If you want to know who was actually removed to empty out those cities, you just have to look at the cartography before the timeline was locked down. Maps printed in the 16th and 17th centuries show a massive contiguous designation across Eurasia, a political and cultural entity of continental scope, Tartaria. It appears on map after map in multiple languages, published across competing empires. It wasn't a myth or an unexplored void. It was a geographic reality with listed provinces, major cities, and trade routes. Then, right as the timeline standardization begins, the name is excised. Not conquered, not gradually absorbed through the normal attrition borders, erased. The territory is chopped into regional designations, renamed, and emptied of its original identity. Civilizations do not vanish without heirs. They do not evaporate. But if you have control over the registry, you don't need to kill everyone. You just have to process the survivors. You change the names. You rename the cities. You claim the towering, advanced masonry already sitting in the centers of your new capitals was built by your own grandfathers. You metabolize the defeated world. The Renaissance was not an era of artistic enlightenment. It was an occupation, a scene of the crime cleanup operation on a global scale. And if you were going to steal an entire world, you need a mechanism to coordinate the lie. You need a way to force every remaining nation, every surviving city, and every future historian to synchronize their clocks to the exact same fraudulent ledger. You need to establish a universal calendar.
In October 1582, Pope Gregory XIII issued a papal bull called Inter Gravissimus. Mainstream history frames this as a minor scientific refinement. The Julian calendar was slightly inaccurate, causing the date of Easter to drift, so the Vatican stepped in to adjust the leap years. That is the sanitized explanation. Look at the enforcement mechanism. The Gregorian reform was a massive, aggressive administrative lockdown. It forced the global synchronization of all civil, legal, and historical records to a single, centralized authority. It demanded that local, decentralized chronologies be completely abandoned. If a nation did not adopt the new calendar, their trade agreements were invalidated, their treaties were voided, they were administratively exiled from the new global economy. They didn't just synchronize the clocks, they locked the filing cabinet. The ledger was cooked, and in 1582 it was permanently sealed.
But if you add 1,000 phantom years to the calendar, you create a massive physical problem. You have centuries of existing buildings, monuments, and cornerstones already carved with dates. You cannot send masons across the entire continent to chisel off the old numbers. It requires too much labor. It invites too many questions. You don't alter the stone, you alter the typography. If you study epigraphy, the forensic analysis of historical inscriptions, you start to notice an anomaly on the cornerstones of the oldest surviving structures in Europe and the Americas. In the Old World, the year was not written as a 4-digit number. It was written with a single letter followed by 3 digits, an I or a J, standing for Isis, the year of our Lord. A cornerstone laid in the 456th year of the era was not carved as 456, it was carved as I 456 or J 456. The administrative reform simply closed the gap.
They instructed the printers, the clerks, and the stonemasons to treat the I as a 1. I 1456 became 1456. In a single, quiet clerical mandate, a millennium of phantom time was injected into the physical record. The buildings didn't move. The stone didn't age. The structure you are standing next to was not built 1,000 years ago. It was built by your immediate ancestors, right before the timeline was padded to make them look like ancient history. The system doesn't need you to forget the truth. It just needs you to believe the truth happened too long ago to matter. That is the entire function of the phantom centuries. It creates an illusion of distance. If the fall of the old world happened 2,000 years ago, it is a tragedy. But if it happened 400 years ago, it is a crime scene, and the people who committed the crime are still sitting in the administrative offices. Look at the date on your phone again.
Look at the 4 digits. Tomorrow you will walk past an old stone building in your city. You will look at the foundation block, and you will see a date carved into the masonry. 1850, 1720. Maybe older. Look closely at the 1. Look at the spacing. Look at how it still resembles an I, a letter, a marker. You are not living in the 21st century. The buffer is an illusion. The timeline was padded so you wouldn't feel the heat of the fire that burned the old world down. Time is not a measurement. It is a boundary line drawn by the victor, and you are standing much, much closer to the edge than you were ever meant to know.